What if saving a stranger's life cost you everything you had, only to give you everything you never knew you needed? Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story that will restore your faith in humanity. A story about Jonas Hale, a forgotten veteran who risked it all in a storm, lost everything by morning, and discovered that one act of courage can change two lives forever. This is completely true, and it stunned an entire town. Stay with me until the very end, and comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The highway stretched out like a black ribbon torn at the edges, fraying under the weight of the storm. Rain didn't just fall, it attacked. It hammered the asphalt in sheets so thick that Jonas Hale could barely see 10 feet beyond his windshield, even with the wipers thrashing back and forth like desperate hands trying to claw through water. Thunder rolled across the sky in deep, resonant waves that seemed to come from somewhere beneath the earth itself, and lightning cracked the darkness open in jagged, violent bursts. Jonas gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white against the worn leather. His old truck shuddered with every gust of wind that slammed into its side, threatening to push him off the road entirely. He should have left the grill an hour earlier. He knew that. But Curtis Blaine, his manager, had kept him late again, scrubbing down the kitchen, taking out trash in the pouring rain, reorganizing the walk-in freezer for the third time that week. Pointless tasks. Humiliating tasks. The kind of work designed not to improve anything, but to remind Jonas of his place. Curtis had stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching Jonas haul the last bag of garbage into the dumpster, rain soaking through his shirt and jeans. "You're slow tonight, Hale," Curtis had said, his voice flat and cold. "Maybe you're getting too old for this job." Jonas hadn't responded. He never did. He'd learned a long time ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when you needed the paycheck more than you needed your pride. So he'd finished the work, clocked out in silence, and climbed into his truck with his dog Valor, a German shepherd with intelligent brown eyes and a calm, steady presence that had saved Jonas's life more times than he could count. Now, as the storm raged around them, Valor sat in the passenger seat, his ears pricked forward, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The dog was perfectly still, but Jonas could feel the tension in him. The same tension Jonas felt in his own chest, a tightness that came from years of training, from instincts honed in places where hesitation meant death. "Almost home, boy," Jonas muttered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the rain. "Just a few more miles." But Valor didn't relax. If anything, the dog grew more alert, his body rigid, his breathing shallow and controlled. Jonas had seen that posture before, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the moments before everything went to hell. It was the posture of a dog who knew something was wrong. And then Jonas saw it. At first it was just a flicker of orange light in the distance, barely visible through the rain. He thought maybe it was a reflection, a trick of the lightning or the taillights of another car. But as he drove closer, the light grew brighter, more distinct, and Jonas felt his stomach drop. It was fire. A car, no, a sedan, dark blue or black, it was hard to tell, sat on the shoulder of the highway, its front end crumpled against a tree. Flames licked up from the hood, small at first, but growing, spreading, consuming the metal and plastic with a hungry, crackling intensity. Smoke poured into the rain-soaked air, thick and black. And even from 100 feet away, Jonas could see the driver's side door hanging open at an unnatural angle, bent and twisted from the impact. His heart slammed against his ribs. His hands moved before his mind caught up, yanking the wheel to the right, pulling the truck onto the shoulder. He didn't think about what he was doing. He didn't weigh the risks or calculate the odds. He just reacted, the way he'd been trained to react, the way his body remembered even when his mind wanted to forget. "Stay," he said to Valor, his voice sharp and commanding. The dog obeyed instantly, though Jonas could see the reluctance in his eyes. Valor wanted to follow. Valor always wanted to follow. Jonas threw open the door and jumped out into the storm. The rain hit him like a physical force, drenching him instantly, plastering his hair to his forehead and soaking through his jeans in seconds. The wind howled around him, carrying the acrid smell of burning rubber and gasoline. And Jonas's mind screamed at him to turn around, to get back in the truck, to call 911 and wait for someone else to handle it. But he didn't. He ran. His boots slipped on the wet asphalt, and he nearly went down twice, but he kept his balance, kept moving, closing the distance between himself and the burning car. The heat hit him before he reached it, a wall of scorching air that made his skin prickle and his eyes water. The flames were spreading fast now, climbing up from the engine compartment and starting to creep along the undercarriage. The gas tank couldn't be far behind. Jonas reached the driver's side door and looked inside. She was there. An elderly woman, maybe 70, maybe older, sat slumped in the driver's seat, her head tilted to one side, her eyes closed. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, and her hands were still gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles pale and tight. She was small, fragile-looking, dressed in a red coat that looked far too elegant for a night like this. Her silver hair was pinned up in a neat bun, and even unconscious, there was something dignified about her, something that spoke of a life lived with purpose and grace. "Ma'am," Jonas shouted, leaning into the car. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. He reached for her shoulder and shook gently. "Ma'am, you need to wake up. We have to get you out of here." Her eyelids fluttered. A soft groan escaped her lips. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head toward him and her eyes opened, pale blue, sharp, filled with confusion and fear. "What? Where?" Her voice was weak, trembling. "You were in an accident," Jonas said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Your car's on fire. I need to get you out. Can you move?" She blinked, trying to focus, and then her gaze drifted to the windshield, to the flames dancing just beyond the glass. Her eyes went wide and she gasped, her hands clutching at the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." "It's okay," Jonas said quickly. "I've got you, but we have to move now." He reached across her and tried to unbuckle her seatbelt, but his hands were shaking, slick with rain, and the buckle was jammed, stuck fast. He pulled harder, his fingers fumbling, and the woman let out a small cry of pain as the belt dug into her shoulder. "Sorry," Jonas muttered. "I'm sorry, I just—" A crack of thunder exploded overhead, so loud and so close that it felt like the sky itself was splitting open. The woman screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure terror, and her hands flew to her ears, her body convulsing in the seat. She was shaking violently now, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and Jonas realized with a sinking feeling that she wasn't just scared. She was panicking. No, she was traumatized. He'd seen it before, in the desert, in men and women who'd been through too much, who carried invisible wounds that never healed. The way her body reacted to the thunder, the way her eyes went distant and glassy, the way she seemed to fold in on herself. It was all too familiar. "Hey," Jonas said softly, placing a hand on her arm. "Hey, look at me. Focus on my voice. You're safe. I promise you're safe." She didn't respond. Her breathing was ragged, uneven, and Jonas could feel the heat from the fire growing more intense, the flames spreading, consuming more of the car with every passing second. They were out of time. He yanked on the seatbelt one more time, putting all his strength into it, and finally, the buckle gave way. The belt snapped back with a metallic click, and Jonas wasted no time. He slid one arm under the woman's knees and the other around her back, lifting her out of the seat as carefully as he could. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless, and as he pulled her free from the wreckage, she let out another soft groan, her head lolling against his shoulder. "I've got you," Jonas said again, more to himself than to her. "I've got you." He turned and started back toward his truck, moving as quickly as he dared. The rain was relentless, making every step treacherous, and the woman's red coat was already soaked through, clinging to her thin frame. Behind them, the fire roared louder, angrier, and Jonas could hear the groaning of metal as the heat warped the car's frame. He'd taken maybe 10 steps when Valor appeared. The dog had disobeyed the command to stay, had jumped out of the truck and sprinted across the highway, his powerful legs eating up the distance in seconds. Now he was at Jonas's side, matching his pace, his eyes locked on the burning car as if he could sense what was about to happen. "Good boy," Jonas breathed. "Good boy, Valor." They reached the truck, and Jonas yanked open the back door, laying the woman down as gently as he could across the back seat. She was still shaking, still muttering under her breath, words Jonas couldn't make out, fragments of sentences that seemed to come from somewhere far away. He He grabbed a blanket from behind the seat and draped it over her, tucking it around her shoulders. "You're okay," he said, even though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "You're going to be okay." Valor jumped into the truck beside her, positioning himself protectively at her feet, and Jonas slammed the door shut. He turned back toward the burning car, intending to see if there was anything else he could salvage. Anything that might help identify the woman or... The explosion was instantaneous. One moment the car was burning, the next it was gone, replaced by a ball of orange and yellow flame that erupted into the night sky with a deafening roar. The shockwave hit Jonas like a punch to the chest, knocking him backward, and he stumbled, nearly falling, his ears ringing from the blast. Heat washed over him, searing and intense, and for a few seconds he couldn't hear anything, couldn't think anything, could only stand there and stare at the inferno where the car had been. And then his training kicked in again, and he turned and ran back to the truck. He climbed into the driver's seat, his hands still shaking, and glanced in the rearview mirror. The woman was lying in the back seat, her eyes closed, Valor pressed against her side. She looked so small, so fragile, and Jonas felt a wave of something he couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, or fear, or just the overwhelming realization of how close they'd all come to dying. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? There's been a car accident on Highway 12, about 2 miles south of the Miller Road exit, Jonas said, forcing his voice to stay calm. Single vehicle crashed into a tree. The car's on fire. Well, it was. It just exploded. I pulled the driver out, an elderly woman. She's conscious but disoriented. She needs an ambulance. Is she injured? She's got a cut on her forehead, maybe a concussion. I don't know what else. She's in shock. An ambulance is on the way, the dispatcher said. Stay on the line with me. Jonas nodded, even though the dispatcher couldn't see him. He looked back at the woman again, and this time her eyes were open, staring up at the ceiling of the truck. She turned her head slowly, her gaze finding Jonas in the rearview mirror. "You saved me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonas swallowed hard. It was the right thing to do. "What's your name?" Jonas Hale. She closed her eyes again, a faint smile touching her lips. "Evelyn," she murmured. "My name is Evelyn Marrow." The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later, lights flashing, sirens wailing, cutting through the storm like a lifeline. 2 paramedics jumped out, efficient and practiced, and Jonas stepped aside as they loaded Evelyn onto a stretcher. She was awake now, more alert, and she kept looking back at Jonas as they wheeled her toward the ambulance. "Thank you," she said again, her voice stronger this time. "Thank you, Jonas." He nodded but didn't say anything. What was there to say? One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, paused as she passed him. "You did good," she said quietly. Another minute and she wouldn't have made it. Jonas just nodded again. He felt numb, hollowed out, like all the adrenaline that had been keeping him upright had suddenly drained away, leaving nothing but exhaustion in its wake. The ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, disappearing into the rain and darkness. Jonas stood there for a moment, watching it go, and then he climbed back into his truck. Valor was still in the back seat, his head resting on the blanket Jonas had used to cover Evelyn. The dog looked up at him, and Jonas could swear he saw something like understanding in those brown eyes. "Come on, boy," Jonas said softly. "Let's go home." He drove slowly, carefully, the storm still raging around them. By the time he pulled into the driveway of his small rented house on the edge of town, it was nearly 3 in the morning. He was soaked to the bone, shivering from cold and shock, and every muscle in his body ached. He didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, Valor curled up at his feet, and stared at the wall. His mind kept replaying the night, the fire, the explosion, the way Evelyn had looked at him with those pale blue eyes and said thank you. He thought about Curtis Blaine, about the way his manager had kept him late, about the petty cruelty that had put him on that highway at that exact moment. If he'd left even 10 minutes earlier, he wouldn't have been there. Evelyn Marrow would have burned alive in that car, and no one would have known. It felt like fate, or luck, or maybe just the universe's way of reminding him that sometimes the worst moments lead to the most important ones. At 6:30, Jonas's alarm went off. He silenced it with a groan, dragged himself out of bed, and got ready for work. His shift started at 7, and Curtis didn't tolerate lateness. But when Jonas pulled into the parking lot of the grill at 7:15, 15 minutes late because he'd had to stop for gas and his hands had been shaking so badly he could barely hold the nozzle, Curtis was already waiting for him. The manager stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face hard and expressionless. Jonas felt his stomach sink. "You're late," Curtis said flatly. "I know," Jonas replied, climbing out of the truck. "I'm sorry. I had a rough night. There was an accident on the highway, and I don't care." Jonas stopped. "What?" Curtis stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "I don't care about your excuses, Hale. You're late. Again. And I'm done dealing with it." "Curtis, I saved someone's life last night. I pulled a woman out of a burning car. I didn't get home until 3 in the morning, and I still showed up." "You're fired." The words hung in the air like a slap. Jonas stared at him, unable to process what he was hearing. You're firing me?" "That's right." Curtis's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Pack up your locker and get out. You're done here." "Curtis, come on. Be reasonable. I've worked here for 2 years. I've never missed a shift, never caused trouble. One night, one accident, and you're just going to throw me out?" "I'm not arguing with you, Hale. You're fired. Leave now, or I'll call the cops and have you escorted off the property." Jonas felt something crack inside him, something that had been holding him together for a long time. He wanted to shout, to argue, to demand that Curtis listen to reason, but he didn't. He just stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight, and nodded slowly. "Fine," he said quietly. "Fine." He turned and walked back to his truck. Valor was watching him through the window, his ears pricked forward, and Jonas could see the concern in the dog's eyes. He climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. He'd saved a woman's life, and it had cost him everything. The next few days passed in a blur. Jonas spent most of his time at home, sitting on his couch, staring at the television without really seeing it. He'd filed for unemployment, but the process was slow, and his savings were almost non-existent. He'd been living paycheck to paycheck for years, scraping by on the meager wages from the grill, and now even that was gone. Valor stayed close, as he always did. The dog seemed to sense Jonas's despair, and he rarely left his side, pressing his body against Jonas's leg whenever he sat down, offering the kind of silent, unconditional support that only a dog could give. On the third day, Jonas forced himself to start looking for work. He drove around town, stopping at every restaurant, every grocery store, every gas station, filling out applications and handing over resumes that were already outdated. Most places didn't even bother to take his information. The few that did gave him polite, non-committal smiles and promised to be in touch. No one called. By the end of the week, Jonas was starting to feel the walls closing in. His rent was due in 2 weeks, and he had maybe $300 in his bank account. He'd started skipping meals to stretch his food budget, and more than once he'd caught himself staring at the stack of bills on his kitchen counter, trying to figure out which ones he could afford to ignore. It was on a Tuesday evening, exactly 8 days after the accident, that everything changed. Jonas was sitting on his porch, watching the sun set over the hills, when a black sedan pulled into his driveway. It was sleek and expensive looking, the kind of car that didn't belong in his neighborhood. And for a moment Jonas thought maybe it was lost, that the driver would realize their mistake and turn around. But the car didn't turn around. It stopped, and the driver's side door opened, and a woman stepped out. Evelyn Marrow. She looked different than she had that night on the highway. Her silver hair was down now, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she was wearing a simple black dress and a cream-colored shawl. The cut on her forehead had healed into a faint red line, barely visible, and her pale blue eyes were sharp and clear. She walked up the driveway with slow, careful steps, and when she reached the porch, she smiled. "Hello, Jonas," she said. Jonas stood up, his heart pounding. "Mrs. Marrow, I didn't expect to see you." "I know," she said gently. "I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced. I hope I'm not intruding." No, not at all." Jonas gestured to the chair beside him. "Please, sit down." She did, lowering herself into the chair with a soft sigh. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Evelyn looked out at the hills, her expression distant and thoughtful, and Jonas found himself studying her, trying to reconcile this calm, composed woman with the terrified, trembling figure he'd pulled from the burning car. "I wanted to thank you," Evelyn said finally, turning to look at him. "Properly, I mean, not just with words." Jonas shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Evelyn said firmly, "not anyone. Most people would have driven past. Most people would have called 911 and waited for someone else to handle it, but you didn't. You risked your life to save mine. And I will never forget that." Jonas didn't know what to say. He looked down at his hands, at the scars and calluses that marked years of hard work, and felt a lump rising in his throat. "I heard what happened," Evelyn continued, her voice soft. "With your job. I heard that you were fired." Jonas's head snapped up. "How did you—" "I made some inquiries," she said simply. "I wanted to know who you were. I wanted to understand the man who saved my life. And when I found out what happened, well, I couldn't just sit by and do nothing." "Mrs. Marrow?" "Evelyn," she corrected gently. "Evelyn," Jonas said, his voice unsteady. "You don't need to do anything. I'll figure it out. I always do." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I don't doubt that you will, Jonas, but that doesn't mean you have to do it alone." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, plain and white, and held it out to him. Jonas stared at it, his heart pounding. "What is this, Wed?" he asked. "Open it," Evelyn said. Jonas took the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a check, made out to him, signed by Evelyn Marrow. The amount made his breath catch in his throat. $10,000. "I can't," Jonas started, but Evelyn raised a hand, cutting him off. "Yes, you can," she said firmly. "And you will. Consider it a thank you, a small one compared to what you gave me." "Mrs. Evelyn, this is too much." "It's not enough," she said quietly, "but it's a start." Jonas looked down at the check, his vision blurring, and for the first time in 8 days, he felt something other than despair. He felt hope. Jonas sat on his porch long after Evelyn's black sedan disappeared down the street, the check still clutched in his hands. $10,000. It was more money than he'd seen in years, maybe ever, all at once. Enough to pay his rent for months. Enough to buy groceries without counting every dollar. Enough to breathe, finally, after drowning for so long. Valor pressed his nose against Jonas's knee, and Jonas reached down absently to scratch behind the dog's ears. "What do you think, boy?" he murmured. "Did that really just happen?" Valor's tail wagged once, slowly, as if to say that yes, it had happened, and maybe Jonas should stop questioning good things when they came his way. That night, Jonas slept better than he had in weeks. He dreamed of nothing, which was a mercy, and when he woke the next morning, the check was still there on his nightstand, real and solid and impossible to deny. He deposited it at the bank before noon, half expecting the teller to tell him it was fake, that it would bounce, that he was being scammed. But the teller just smiled and processed the transaction without comment, and Jonas walked out of the bank feeling like he'd been given a second chance at life. He spent the next few days catching up on bills, restocking his kitchen, and taking Valor for long walks through the park. For the first time in a long time, Jonas felt like he could think clearly, like the constant pressure of survival had lifted just enough for him to see beyond the next 24 hours. But the peace didn't last. It started small, the way these things always do. Jonas began to notice Valor acting strangely, ears perked, head tilted, body tense in that particular way that meant the dog had detected something wrong. At first, Jonas dismissed it as paranoia, his own or the dog's, a leftover instinct from their years in combat zones where every shadow could hide a threat. But then he started seeing the car. It was a gray sedan, nondescript and forgettable, the kind of car that blended into traffic without drawing attention. Jonas first noticed it parked across the street from his house on a Thursday afternoon. He thought nothing of it. People parked on his street all the time, visiting neighbors or cutting through to the main road. But when he left for the grocery store an hour later, the car was still there, and when he came back, it was gone. The next day he saw it again. This time it was parked 3 houses down, and Jonas could see a figure in the driver's seat, though the tinted windows made it impossible to make out any details. He stood on his porch for a long moment, staring at the car, and Valor growled low in his throat, a sound Jonas had only heard a handful of times, always when something was genuinely wrong. "Easy, boy," Jonas said quietly, though his hand had moved instinctively to Valor's collar, holding the dog close. The car didn't move. The figure inside didn't get out. After 15 minutes, Jonas went back inside and locked the door behind him. On Saturday, Jonas decided he was being ridiculous. He needed to get out, needed to do something other than sit in his house and imagine threats that probably didn't exist. He drove to the hardware store to pick up supplies for some minor repairs around the house, and Valor came with him, riding in the passenger seat with his head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. Jonas was loading paint cans into the bed of his truck when he felt it, that prickle on the back of his neck, the sensation of being watched. He straightened and looked around the parking lot. There were maybe a dozen other cars scattered across the asphalt, people coming and going, pushing carts full of lumber and gardening supplies and bags of concrete. And there, 3 rows over, was the gray sedan. Jonas's heart kicked into a faster rhythm. He couldn't see the driver, but he was certain the car was the same one he'd seen near his house. The license plate was too far away to read, but the dent on the rear bumper, the missing hubcap on the front passenger side, it was the same car. He stood there for a long moment, debating what to do. He could walk over, confront whoever was inside, demand to know why they were following him, or he could get in his truck and drive away, pretend he hadn't seen anything. Valor made the decision for him. The dog jumped out of the truck before Jonas could stop him and trotted across the parking lot, heading straight for the gray sedan. Jonas cursed under his breath and jogged after him. "Valor! Heel!" But the dog didn't heel. He stopped about 10 feet from the sedan, his body rigid, his gaze locked on the driver's side window. A low growl rumbled in his chest, and Jonas felt his pulse spike. Valor didn't growl at nothing. Jonas approached slowly, his hands visible, non-threatening, the way he'd been trained. "Hey," he called out. "Can I help you with something?" No response. "I said, can I help you?" Still nothing. Jonas took another step forward, and the sedan's engine roared to life. The car shot backward out of the parking space, tires squealing, and Jonas had to jump back to avoid being hit. Valor barked once, sharp and angry, but the car was already speeding toward the exit, weaving between other vehicles with reckless abandon. Jonas stood there, breathing hard, adrenaline flooding his system. He'd only caught a glimpse of the driver, male, middle-aged, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, but it was enough to confirm that this wasn't random. Someone was following him, someone who didn't want to be identified. He drove home with one eye on the rear-view mirror, his jaw tight, his mind racing. Who would follow him and why? He wasn't involved in anything illegal, didn't owe anyone money, had no enemies that he knew of. The only thing that had changed in his life recently was Evelyn, and the check, and Curtis. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. Curtis Blaine, his former manager, the man who'd fired him for being 15 minutes late after saving someone's life. Jonas had assumed Curtis was just a petty tyrant, a small man with a small amount of power who enjoyed wielding it over people who couldn't fight back. But what if it was more than that? Jonas pulled into his driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, thinking. Curtis had been so quick to fire him, so eager to get him out of the building. At the time, Jonas had chalked it up to general hostility, but now he wondered if there was something else going on, something he'd missed. He spent the rest of the weekend on edge, jumping at every sound, checking the windows every few minutes to see if the gray sedan had returned. It hadn't, but that didn't make him feel any better. If anything, the absence was worse than the presence, because it meant whoever was watching him was being more careful now. On Monday morning, Jonas's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, local, but not one he recognized. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Jonas Hale?" The voice on the other end was male, professional, unfamiliar. "Yeah, who's this?" "My name is Richard Pemberton. I'm an attorney. I'm calling on behalf of Evelyn Marrow." Jonas's grip on the phone tightened. "Is she okay?" "She's fine," Pemberton said quickly. "I apologize. I didn't mean to alarm you. She asked me to reach out to you regarding a legal matter. Would you be available to meet at my office this afternoon? What kind of legal matter? I'd prefer to discuss it in person, if that's all right with you. It won't take long. Jonas hesitated. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to be cautious, to ask more questions, to not walk blindly into a situation he didn't understand. But this was Evelyn's attorney. Evelyn, who had given him $10,000 and asked for nothing in return. Evelyn, who had thanked him with tears in her eyes. Yeah, Jonas said finally. Yeah, I can be there. What's the address? Pemberton gave him the address of an office building downtown, and they agreed to meet at 2 o'clock. Jonas hung up and stood there for a moment, staring at his phone, trying to make sense of what was happening. At 1:30, he loaded Valor into the truck and drove downtown. The attorney's office was on the third floor of a modern glass building, all sleek lines and polished surfaces that made Jonas feel out of place in his worn jeans and faded jacket. A receptionist with perfect hair and a polite smile directed him to a conference room where Richard Pemberton was waiting. Pemberton was in his 50s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Jonas made in a month. He stood when Jonas entered and extended his hand. Mr. Hale, thank you for coming. Jonas shook his hand. What's this about? Pemberton gestured to a chair. Please, sit. Jonas sat, Valor settling at his feet. Pemberton took the seat across from him and folded his hands on the table. Mrs. Marrow has asked me to inform you of a situation that has recently come to our attention, Pemberton said. It involves your former employer, the restaurant where you worked. Jonas felt his stomach tighten. What about it? Mrs. Marrow has been making inquiries into the circumstances of your termination. She felt, and I agree, that your dismissal was unjust, particularly given the heroic actions you took the night of the accident. In the course of those inquiries, we discovered some troubling information. What kind of information? Pemberton opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. It was a still image from what looked like security camera footage, showing the interior of the restaurant. Jonas recognized it immediately. It was the kitchen where he'd worked for 2 years. But something about the image was off. The timestamp in the corner read 2 weeks ago, but Jonas didn't recognize the scene. The kitchen was a mess, equipment scattered, and there was a figure in the frame that looked like him, but... That's not me, Jonas said slowly. We know, Pemberton said. The footage has been doctored. Someone has digitally inserted your likeness into several videos from the restaurant's security system. In these videos, you appear to be engaging in erratic, aggressive behavior, yelling at coworkers, throwing equipment, acting in ways that could be construed as threatening or unstable. Jonas stared at the photograph, his blood running cold. Who would do that? We believe it was Curtis Blaine, your former manager. Mrs. Marrow hired a private investigator to look into Mr. Blaine's activities, and we've uncovered evidence that he has been creating and distributing these falsified videos, presumably to justify your termination and to damage your reputation. Why? Jonas's voice came out hoarse. Why would he go to all that trouble? Pemberton leaned back in his chair. That's what we're still trying to determine. It's possible Mr. Blaine simply has a personal vendetta against you. Or there may be something else going on, something more complicated. Either way, what he's doing is illegal, and Mrs. Marrow wants to help you pursue legal action against him. Jonas's mind was spinning. Falsified videos, a vendetta. It explained so much. Curtis's eagerness to fire him, the way he'd been so cold and dismissive, the sense Jonas had that there was something more going on beneath the surface, and it explained the gray sedan. Someone's been following me, Jonas said abruptly. A gray car. I've seen it near my house in parking lots. The driver won't show his face. Pemberton's expression darkened. We suspected as much. Mr. Blaine appears to be escalating. I would strongly recommend you exercise caution, Mr. Hale. If he's willing to fabricate evidence against you, there's no telling what else he might do. Jonas felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. For 2 years he'd worked for Curtis Blaine, had swallowed his pride and done every degrading task the man had thrown at him, and this was how Curtis repaid him. Not just by firing him, but by trying to destroy his reputation, by stalking him, by turning Jonas's life into a nightmare. What can I do? Jonas asked. For now, document everything. If you see the gray sedan again, take photographs, write down the license plate number. Don't confront whoever is driving it. Let us handle that. And most importantly, keep yourself safe. Mrs. Marrow is very concerned about your well-being." Jonas nodded slowly. "Tell her thank you for everything." "You can tell her yourself," Pemberton said with a small smile. "She's asked to see you, actually. She'd like you to come to her home for dinner tomorrow evening, if you're available." "I'll be there," Jonas said without hesitation. He left the office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The world he thought he understood, the simple, straightforward world where he was just an unlucky guy who'd lost his job, was gone, replaced by something darker and more complicated. Curtis Blaine wasn't just a bad boss. He was dangerous. That night, Jonas couldn't sleep. He lay in bed with Valor curled up beside him, staring at the ceiling, his mind churning through everything Pemberton had told him. The falsified videos, the stalking, the deliberate, calculated cruelty of it all. At 2 a.m, Valor's head shot up. The dog's ears were pricked forward, his body tense, and Jonas felt his heart start to pound. "What is it, boy?" Valor jumped off the bed and trotted to the window, a low growl building in his throat. Jonas got up and moved to the window, careful to stay to the side, out of sight. He peered through the curtain. The gray sedan was parked across the street. Jonas's breath caught. The car was dark, no lights on, but he could make out the shape of someone in the driver's seat. As he watched, the driver's side door opened and a figure stepped out. It was too dark to see clearly, but Jonas could make out the general shape. Male, average height, wearing dark clothing. The figure stood beside the car for a moment, looking toward Jonas's house, and then started walking across the street. Every muscle in Jonas's body tensed. This was it. Whatever Curtis, or whoever this was, had planned, it was happening now. Jonas moved quickly and quietly, grabbing his phone and pulling up the camera app. He positioned himself near the front door, Valor at his side, and waited. He could hear footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate, and then the sound of something scraping against the wood, someone trying the doorknob. The door was locked, thank God, but the scraping continued, and Jonas realized with a jolt of alarm that whoever was out there was trying to pick the lock. He didn't wait any longer. He yanked open the door, his phone held high, the camera recording. The figure on his porch froze, caught in the act, a lock-picking tool still in his hand. For a split second, Jonas got a clear look at the man's face. Middle-aged, clean-shaven, eyes wide with surprise, and then the man spun and ran. Jonas lunged after him, but Valor was faster. The dog shot past Jonas like a missile, closing the distance in 3 powerful strides, and leaped at the fleeing figure. Valor's jaws clamped down on the man's sleeve, dragging him off balance, and the man went down hard on the front lawn, cursing and flailing. "Get him off me! Get him off!" Jonas walked down the porch steps slowly, his phone still recording. "Valor, hold!" The dog obeyed, keeping his grip on the man's arm but not biting harder, just pinning him in place. The man was breathing hard, his face twisted with fear and anger, and Jonas recognized him now. It was Curtis Blaine. "You," Jonas said, his voice cold and flat. "What the hell are you doing here, Curtis?" Curtis struggled against Valor's grip, but the dog didn't budge. "Let me go, Hale. This is assault. I'll sue you." "You broke into my property, or tried to. I've got it all on video." Jonas held up his phone. "And I've got you on camera following me for the past week. What were you planning to do, Curtis? Plant something in my house? Stage another fake video?" Curtis's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yeah, you do. My attorney showed me the videos you faked, the ones where you made me look unstable." "What's the matter, Curtis? Firing me wasn't enough? You had to try to destroy my life?" "You don't understand. Then explain it to me." Curtis's jaw worked, and for a moment Jonas thought he might actually tell the truth. But then the man's expression hardened, and he spat. "You ruined everything. You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing. You're a washed-up vet who can't hold down a job, and I was doing you a favor by employing you in the first place." Jonas felt anger surge through him, hot and fierce, but he kept his voice calm. "I worked harder than anyone in that kitchen. I never complained, never caused problems. And when I saved someone's life, you fired me for it. So yeah, Curtis, I do think I'm a hero. Compared to you, anyway." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Curtis's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" Calling the police. You're trespassing, and you tried to break into my house. I'm pretty sure that's illegal. Wait, Hale, don't. But Jonas was already talking to the dispatcher, calmly explaining the situation, giving his address. Curtis struggled against Valor's grip again, but the dog held firm, and after a moment Curtis went limp, defeated. The police arrived 10 minutes later, 2 officers in a patrol car, their lights flashing red and blue across the quiet street. Jonas explained what had happened, showed them the video on his phone, and handed over the lockpicking tool that Curtis had dropped on the porch. The officers listened, took notes, and then placed Curtis in handcuffs. "You're making a mistake," Curtis said as they led him to the patrol car. "This isn't over, Hale, you hear me? This isn't over." Jonas didn't respond. He just stood on his porch, Valor at his side, and watched as the police car drove away. One of the officers stayed behind to take a formal statement, and by the time he left it was nearly 4 in the morning. Jonas went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch with Valor pressed against his leg. His hands were shaking. He'd been in combat zones, had faced down insurgents with assault rifles, had seen things that would give most people nightmares for the rest of their lives. But this felt different. This was personal. This was someone actively trying to hurt him, not because of war or duty or ideology, but out of spite and cruelty. And it scared him more than he wanted to admit. The next evening, Jonas drove to Evelyn's house. The address Pemberton had given him led to a neighborhood Jonas had never been to before, a place where the houses were set back from the road behind tall hedges and wrought iron gates, where the lawns were manicured and the trees were old and stately. Evelyn's home was at the end of a long driveway, a 2-story colonial with white columns and black shutters, elegant and understated. Jonas parked his truck and walked to the front door, Valor at his side, feeling distinctly out of place. Evelyn answered the door herself, wearing a soft blue sweater and gray slacks, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Jonas, come in, please." He stepped inside and Valor followed, his tail wagging slowly. The interior of the house was warm and inviting, filled with antique furniture and bookshelves that lined the walls from floor to ceiling. It smelled like fresh bread and something savory cooking in the kitchen. "I heard about what happened last night," Evelyn said, leading him into a sitting room. "Richard called me this morning. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Jonas said, though he wasn't sure that was entirely true. "Curtis is in custody. That's what matters." Evelyn nodded, but her expression was troubled. "I'm so sorry, Jonas. I feel responsible for all of this. If I hadn't given you that check, if I hadn't asked Richard to investigate—" "Don't," Jonas interrupted gently. "None of this is your fault. Curtis was the one who chose to do what he did, and honestly, if you hadn't helped me, I might never have known what he was up to. I'd still be out there thinking I was just unlucky, that I deserved to be fired." Evelyn smiled, though her eyes were bright with emotion. "You're a good man, Jonas Hale. Better than you know." They had dinner together, just the 2 of them, in a small dining room that overlooked the garden. Evelyn had made roast chicken and vegetables, simple but delicious, and as they ate, they talked about small things: Valor's training, the books on Evelyn's shelves, the changes in the town over the years. It felt easy, comfortable, like they'd known each other for much longer than a few weeks. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room and Evelyn poured them each a glass of wine. Jonas rarely drank, but he accepted it gratefully, and they sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. "Can I ask you something?" Jonas said finally. "Of course." "That night in the car, the storm. You were terrified of the thunder. I've seen that kind of fear before, in people who've been through trauma. What happened to you, Evelyn?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wine glass. When she spoke, her voice was soft, distant. "I was in London during the Blitz," she said. "I was just a child, 9 years old. My family lived in the East End, and the bombs fell almost every night. I remember the sound, the way the earth would shake, the way the air would fill with dust and smoke, and the thunder. The thunder sounded just like the bombs." Jonas felt his throat tighten. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," Evelyn said, though her hands trembled slightly. "But some things never leave you, do they? Some fears are too deep to outgrow." "No," Jonas agreed quietly. "They don't leave you." They sat together in silence, two people bound by trauma and survival, and Jonas felt something shift inside him, a connection he hadn't expected, a kinship born not of words but of shared understanding. Evelyn reached over and placed her hand on his, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you, Jonas, for saving me, for being here, for understanding." Jonas squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep going." In the days that followed, Jonas found himself drawn back to Evelyn's house more often than he'd expected. At first it was practical reasons. Pemberton needed him to review documents related to the case against Curtis, to give statements, to sign paperwork. But those meetings always stretched longer than necessary, turning into conversations over coffee, then lunch, then dinner. Evelyn seemed to welcome his presence, and Jonas realized with something like surprise that he welcomed hers too. It had been a long time since Jonas had felt truly connected to another person. The war had taken that from him, or maybe he left it behind on purpose, afraid that letting anyone too close would mean risking the kind of loss he'd already experienced too many times. But Evelyn was different. She didn't ask him to be anything other than what he was. She didn't flinch when he went quiet, didn't press when he didn't want to talk. She simply existed alongside him, offering companionship without demands. And Jonas found himself slowly, carefully, lowering the walls he'd built around himself. Valor seemed to sense the shift too. The dog had taken to Evelyn immediately, following her around her house with the same protective devotion he showed Jonas, resting his head on her knee when they sat together in the evening. Evelyn would run her fingers through his fur and smile, and Jonas could see the tension leaving her shoulders, the fear that had haunted her since the accident gradually loosening its grip. It was on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after Curtis's arrest, that everything came to a head. Jonas was at Evelyn's house, helping her organize some boxes in her study. She'd mentioned wanting to sort through old papers, decades of accumulated documents and photographs that she'd never quite gotten around to addressing. They worked in comfortable silence, Jonas on the floor sorting files while Evelyn sat in her chair and directed him when Richard Pemberton called. Evelyn put the call on speaker. "Richard? Hello, Jonas is here with me." "Good," Pemberton said, and Jonas could hear the tension in his voice. "I need you both to hear this. We've had a development in the case." Jonas stood up, his pulse quickening. "What kind of development?" "Curtis Blaine made bail 2 days ago. We knew this was coming, but I'd hoped we'd have more time to prepare. He's been charged with attempted breaking and entering, stalking, and fraud related to the falsified videos. But the restaurant's corporate office has also gotten involved, and they're pushing back hard." "What do you mean, pushing back?" Evelyn asked, her voice sharp. "They're claiming Curtis acted alone, that the company had no knowledge of his activities. They've offered Jonas a settlement, $25,000 and a confidentiality agreement. In exchange, Jonas would drop all claims against the restaurant and Curtis." Jonas felt his jaw tighten. "They want me to just let it go?" "That's what they're offering, yes. And I'll be honest with you, Jonas, it's not a bad offer from a purely financial standpoint. $25,000 is significant, and pursuing this case could take months, even years. There are no guarantees we'll win, and even if we do, you might not get much more than what they're offering now." "But?" Evelyn prompted. "But if Jonas accepts, Curtis walks away with minimal consequences. The charges against him might be reduced or dropped as part of the settlement, and the restaurant continues operating as if nothing happened, free to treat their next employee the same way they treated Jonas." Jonas paced across the room, his hands clenched into fists. Part of him wanted to take the money. $25,000 would change his life, would give him breathing room he'd never had before. He could start over, find a new job without the constant pressure of imminent financial collapse hanging over his head. But the thought of Curtis Blaine walking away unpunished made his stomach turn. "What do you think I should do?" Jonas asked, looking at Evelyn. She met his gaze steadily. "I think you should do what feels right to you, not what's easy or profitable. Money comes and goes, Jonas, but your integrity, your sense of justice, those are things you live with every day." Jonas nodded slowly. He turned back to the phone. "Tell them no. I'm not taking the settlement." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" Pemberton asked. "I want you to be absolutely certain about this decision." I'm sure. All right then. I'll inform them. But Jonas, I need you to be prepared for what comes next. Curtis and the restaurant are going to fight this. They're going to try to discredit you, to paint you as unstable or dishonest. It's going to get ugly. Let it get ugly, Jonas said quietly. I'm not backing down. After Pemberton hung up, Jonas stood at the window, looking out at Evelyn's garden. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and somewhere in the distance he could hear birds singing, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over his life. Evelyn came to stand beside him. You made the right choice, she said softly. Did I? $25,000 is a lot of money. Money you would have spent the rest of your life knowing you'd sold your principles for. She placed a hand on his arm. I know what it's like to compromise yourself, Jonas. To do what's expedient instead of what's right. I spent years of my life playing it safe, avoiding conflict, letting injustice slide because it was easier than fighting, and it hollowed me out. Don't let that happen to you. Jonas looked at her, at the strength in her pale blue eyes, and felt something solidify inside him. I won't. The following Monday, Jonas was scheduled to meet with Pemberton at the restaurant where he'd worked. The corporate office had agreed to a mediation session, a last-ditch attempt to resolve the situation before it went to court. Jonas drove there with Valor in the passenger seat, his stomach churning with anxiety and anger. The restaurant looked exactly the same as it had the last time he'd seen it, the day Curtis had fired him. The parking lot was half full with the lunch crowd, and through the windows Jonas could see servers moving between tables, the ordinary rhythm of a business day. It felt surreal, like stepping back in time to a place that should have been dead and buried but somehow still existed, indifferent to everything that had happened. Pemberton was waiting for him near the entrance, briefcase in hand. Jonas, are you ready for this? As ready as I'll ever be. They walked inside together, and Jonas was immediately struck by how many eyes turned toward him. Some of the staff he recognized, line cooks he'd worked alongside, servers he'd chatted with during slow shifts. A few of them looked away quickly, uncomfortable. Others stared with open curiosity or hostility. Pemberton led him to a private dining room in the back where the mediation was being held. Inside, a long table had been set up with chairs on either side. On one side sat three people Jonas didn't recognize. Two men in expensive suits and a woman with her hair pulled back severely, all of them radiating corporate authority. And beside them, looking smaller and more diminished than Jonas had ever seen him, was Curtis Blaine. Curtis's gaze flickered to Jonas and then away, his face pale and drawn. He'd lost weight since Jonas had last seen him, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Good, Jonas thought with grim satisfaction. They took their seats, Jonas and Pemberton on one side of the table, the corporate representatives and Curtis on the other. A mediator, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, sat at the head of the table. Thank you all for being here, the mediator said. Let's begin by establishing what we hope to accomplish today. The goal of mediation is to find a resolution that satisfies both parties without the need for protracted litigation. Mr. Hale, I understand you've rejected the settlement offer. Can you explain your reasoning? Jonas cleared his throat. I rejected it because it doesn't address the real problem. Curtis Blaine didn't just fire me unfairly. He fabricated evidence against me, stalked me, and tried to break into my home. And the restaurant's response has been to offer me money to go away and pretend none of it happened. That's not justice. That's covering up a crime. One of the corporate lawyers, a man with silver hair and cold eyes, leaned forward. Mr. Hale, let's be very clear about something. Mr. Blaine's actions, while regrettable, were not representative of our company's values or policies. He acted independently, outside the scope of his employment. We've already terminated his position and implemented new training protocols to ensure this doesn't happen again. You fired him after you found out I wasn't going to just disappear quietly, Jonas shot back. Before that, you were perfectly happy to let him do whatever he wanted. That's not true, isn't it? Curtis didn't wake up one day and decide to ruin my life for no reason. He did it because your company created an environment where managers have unchecked power over their employees, where someone like me, someone who doesn't have resources or connections, can be discarded without a second thought. The room fell silent. Curtis was staring at the table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. The corporate lawyers exchanged glances, and Jonas could see them recalculating their strategy. The mediator spoke again. "Mr. Blaine, do you have anything you'd like to say?" Curtis didn't respond for a long moment. Then, slowly, he raised his head and looked directly at Jonas. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, and for the first time Jonas saw something that might have been remorse. "I'm sorry," Curtis said quietly. "I'm sorry for what I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it." Jonas felt his anger waver, just slightly. "Then why did you do it?" Curtis's jaw worked. "Because I was scared. The regional manager had been on me for months about productivity, about costs, about everything. He told me if I didn't improve the numbers, I'd be out. And you were always so calm, so competent. The staff liked you. I thought if I got rid of you, I could bring in someone cheaper, someone who wouldn't make me look bad by comparison." He laughed bitterly. "Stupid, right? I destroyed someone's life to save my own pathetic career. And the videos? The stalking? I panicked. After I fired you, I realized you might sue, might cause problems. So I started trying to build a case against you to make it look like you were the problem, not me. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just kept digging myself deeper and deeper until..." He broke off, his voice cracking. "Until I became someone I don't even recognize." Jonas stared at him, trying to reconcile this broken, apologetic man with the cold-eyed manager who had humiliated him, who had made his life hell. Part of him wanted to feel satisfaction at seeing Curtis brought low, but mostly he just felt tired. "Do you know what the worst part is?" Jonas said quietly. "I would have forgiven you. If you just admitted you made a mistake, if you'd apologized and tried to make things right, I would have moved on. But instead you tried to destroy me. And for what? To protect yourself from consequences you brought on yourself?" Curtis didn't answer. He just sat there, his shoulders slumped, defeated. The corporate lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, given Mr. Blaine's apology, would you be willing to reconsider the settlement? We could increase the amount to $30,000. "No," Jonas interrupted. "I don't want your money. I want accountability. I want Curtis to face real consequences for what he did. And I want your company to change the way it treats employees so this doesn't happen to someone else. We've already implemented new policies. Then prove it. Make those policies public. Let an independent auditor review your management practices. Create a fund to help employees who've been treated unfairly. Show me you actually care about doing the right thing, not just protecting your bottom line." The lawyers exchanged more glances. The woman spoke for the first time. "Those are significant demands, Mr. Hale. We'd need time to discuss them with our board." "Then take your time," Jonas said. "I'm not going anywhere." The mediation ended without resolution. Pemberton seemed pleased as they walked back to the parking lot. "You handled that well," he said. "You didn't let them intimidate you, and you made it clear this isn't just about money. That's going to make it much harder for them to paint you as opportunistic." Jonas nodded, but he felt hollow inside. Seeing Curtis like that, broken and apologetic, had taken something out of him. It was easier to fight when your enemy was a monster. But Curtis was just a man, flawed and frightened, who'd made terrible choices and destroyed lives in the process, including his own. He drove home slowly, Valor's head resting on his thigh, and when he got there he found Evelyn's car in his driveway. She was sitting on his porch, a basket beside her. "I thought you might need some company," she said as he approached. "And I brought dinner, nothing fancy, just sandwiches and soup, but it's warm." Jonas felt something in his chest loosen. "Thank you." They ate together on his porch, watching the sun set over the hills, and Jonas told her everything that had happened at the mediation. Evelyn listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Do you think he meant it?" she asked. "Curtis's apology?" "I think he regrets what he did. Whether that's the same as being truly sorry, I don't know." Evelyn nodded slowly. Regret and remorse are different things. Regret is about consequences. Remorse is about understanding the harm you caused and wanting to make amends. Curtis may be feeling both, or he may just be afraid of going to prison. Does it matter which? To him? Maybe. To you? She looked at Jonas intently. No. What matters is that you're standing up for yourself. For your dignity. That takes courage, Jonas. More courage than most people have. They sat in silence for a while, and then Evelyn spoke again, her voice softer. Can I tell you something about why I've been helping you? You don't have to explain. I want to. She set down her soup bowl and folded her hands in her lap. After my husband died 10 years ago, I lost myself for a while. I had his money, his foundation, his legacy, but I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have anything that felt meaningful. I went through the motions, attended charity events, wrote checks, did all the things people expected of me. But inside I was empty. Jonas listened, his attention fully on her. The night you saved me, Evelyn continued, I wasn't just escaping the fire. I was escaping my own life. I'd been driving in that storm on purpose, taking risks I shouldn't have taken, because part of me didn't care what happened. And then you appeared. This stranger who risked everything to pull me out of that car, who saw me as someone worth saving when I'd stopped seeing myself that way. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You gave me back my life, Jonas. Not just physically, but in every way that matters. And helping you, standing beside you in this fight, it's given me a purpose again. So really, I should be thanking you. Jonas felt his throat tighten. He reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. We saved each other then. Yes, Evelyn said, smiling through her tears. I think we did. Over the next 2 weeks, Jonas and Evelyn fell into a rhythm. He would spend his mornings looking for work, filling out applications, and attending interviews that rarely went anywhere. In the afternoons, he would drive to Evelyn's house, and they would talk for hours about their lives, their losses, the things they'd survived, and the scars they carried. They cooked together, walked through her garden with Valor trotting ahead, and slowly, carefully, built something that felt like family. Jonas hadn't had family in a long time. His parents had died when he was in his 20s, and he had no siblings, no close relatives. The army had been his family for years, but after he'd left, after the things he'd seen and done had made it impossible to stay, he'd been alone. He'd convinced himself he preferred it that way, that solitude was safer than connection. But Evelyn was changing that. She was teaching him, through her quiet presence and unwavering support, that it was possible to let someone in without losing yourself. That vulnerability wasn't weakness, but strength. It was during one of these afternoons, as they sat in Evelyn's study reviewing documents Pemberton had sent over, that Jonas noticed Evelyn rubbing her chest absently. She'd been doing it on and off for the past hour, her face occasionally tightening with what looked like discomfort. Are you okay? Jonas asked. Oh yes, I'm fine, just a bit of indigestion, I think. But an hour later, Evelyn stood up abruptly, her face pale, and pressed a hand to her chest. Jonas, he was on his feet instantly. What's wrong? I feel strange, dizzy. Jonas grabbed her arm, steadying her. Sit down. Deep breaths. But Evelyn shook her head, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. No, it's not. It's my heart. Oh God, Jonas, I think something's wrong with my heart. Panic shot through Jonas, but his training kicked in immediately. He guided Evelyn to the couch, laying her down gently, and grabbed his phone to call 911. As he gave the dispatcher the address and explained the symptoms, he kept one hand on Evelyn's wrist, monitoring her pulse. It was fast and irregular, jumping erratically under his fingers. Stay with me, Evelyn, he said, his voice calm even though his heart was pounding. Help is coming. Just stay with me. Evelyn's eyes found his, wide and frightened. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, but you're going to be okay. I've got you. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, and the paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, checking Evelyn's vitals, hooking her up to monitors, loading her onto a stretcher. Jonas climbed into the ambulance with her, refusing to leave her side, and held her hand as they raced toward the hospital. At the emergency room, doctors whisked Evelyn away behind swinging doors, and Jonas was left standing in the waiting area, his hand shaking, Valor pressing against his leg. He called Pemberton, who promised to come immediately, and then he just stood there, feeling helpless and terrified in a way he hadn't felt since the war. 2 hours passed, then 3. Jonas paced the waiting room, unable to sit, unable to think about anything except Evelyn lying alone in some hospital room fighting for her life. Pemberton arrived and sat with him, offering quiet support, but Jonas barely registered his presence. Finally, a doctor emerged, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes. "Are you here for Evelyn Marrow?" Jonas nodded, his throat too tight to speak. "She's stable," the doctor said, and Jonas felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. "She's had what we call a cardiac event. Essentially, her heart went into an irregular rhythm. We've managed to correct it with medication, but she's going to need to stay for observation, possibly for several days. She has a pre-existing heart condition that we weren't aware of, something that's been slowly worsening over time." "Is she going to be okay?" Jonas managed. "With proper treatment and monitoring, yes. But this was a serious warning. She's going to need to make some significant lifestyle changes, and she'll be on medication for the rest of her life." The doctor paused. "She's asking for you. Room 342, third floor." Jonas took the elevator up, Pemberton following behind. When he reached Evelyn's room, he paused in the doorway, steeling himself. Then he stepped inside. Evelyn was lying in the hospital bed, looking impossibly small and fragile against the white sheets. Monitors beeped softly beside her, and an IV line ran into her arm. But her eyes were open and alert, and when she saw Jonas, she smiled. "There you are," she said, her voice weak but steady. "I was worried you'd left." Jonas crossed the room and took her hand. "I'm not going anywhere. The doctor says I have a faulty heart. Apparently it's been faulty for quite some time, and I've just been ignoring the symptoms." She laughed softly. "Foolish of me." "You're going to be fine," Jonas said firmly. "You're going to rest and take your medication and do whatever the doctors tell you to do, and I'm going to make sure you follow orders." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "My fierce protector." "Always." They sat together in silence for a while, and then Evelyn spoke again, her voice quieter now. "Jonas, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you weeks ago." "What is it?" "My husband, before he died, he established a foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to helping veterans transition back to civilian life. It provides job training, housing assistance, counseling, everything soldiers need when they come home. He was a veteran himself, you see, Vietnam. He understood how hard it could be." Jonas nodded, listening. "I've been running the foundation since he passed, but I haven't been doing a very good job of it. I've been so caught up in my own grief, my own emptiness, that I let it languish. But meeting you, seeing what you've been through, it reminded me why the foundation matters, why my husband cared so much about it." She looked at Jonas intently. "I want you to help me run it, Jonas. I want you to be part of making sure other veterans don't fall through the cracks the way you almost did." Jonas stared at her, stunned. "Evelyn, I'm not qualified for something like that." "You're more qualified than anyone. You've lived it. You understand what these men and women need because you needed it yourself. Please, Jonas, say you'll at least think about it." Jonas felt tears prick at his eyes. He looked down at their joined hands, at the way Evelyn's thin fingers gripped his with surprising strength, and he nodded. "I'll think about it," he said, "but right now you need to focus on getting better." Evelyn smiled. "Deal." Evelyn spent 5 days in the hospital, and Jonas spent nearly every waking hour by her side. He slept in the uncomfortable chair next to her bed, ate cafeteria food that tasted like cardboard, and learned more about heart conditions than he'd ever wanted to know. Valor stayed with Pemberton during the days, but every evening the attorney would bring the dog to the hospital, and the staff looked the other way when Jonas sneaked him up to Evelyn's room. The sight of Valor's gentle face always made Evelyn smile, and she would run her fingers through his fur while the dog rested his head on the edge of her bed, as if he too understood she needed protecting now. The doctors ran test after test, adjusting medications, monitoring her heart rhythm, discussing treatment options in terms Jonas struggled to follow. But the message was clear. Evelyn's heart was damaged, weakened by years of undiagnosed issues, and while she could live a full life with proper care, she would never be quite the same. She would need to slow down, avoid stress, take a pharmacy's worth of pills every day. For a woman who had always prided herself on her independence, who had spent the last decade running a foundation and managing a substantial estate largely on her own, it was a devastating blow. Jonas watched her struggle with the reality of her limitations, saw the frustration flash across her face when doctors told her what she could no longer do. But he also saw her strength, the way she set her jaw and asked pointed questions about treatment options, the way she made lists of medications and side effects with the same meticulous attention she brought to everything else in her life. She was adapting, the way survivors always did, finding ways to work within new constraints rather than railing against them. On her last day in this hospital, Jonas sat with her while she signed discharge papers and listened to final instructions from her cardiologist. The doctor, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, emphasized the importance of follow-up appointments and warned Evelyn about the signs of another cardiac event. "You're fortunate, Mrs. Marrow," the doctor said gently. "Many people don't get a warning like this. You have a chance to make changes, to extend your life significantly if you're careful." "I understand," Evelyn said, her voice steady, "and I intend to be very careful indeed." After the doctor left, Evelyn turned to Jonas. "Will you take me home?" "Of course, Pemberton's bringing the car around now." "No, I mean—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Will you stay with me? At my house, just for a few days until I'm steadier on my feet? I know it's an imposition, but the thought of being alone right now—" "You don't have to explain," Jonas interrupted. "I'll stay as long as you need me to." Relief flooded Evelyn's face. "Thank you." Jonas moved into Evelyn's guest room that evening, a spacious room on the second floor with windows overlooking the garden. It felt strange at first, being in someone else's home, sleeping in a bed that wasn't his own. But Valor settled in immediately, claiming a spot on the rug beside the bed, and by the second night Jonas found himself relaxing into the routine. He would wake early, make coffee, check on Evelyn to ensure she'd taken her morning medications, and then they would have breakfast together in the sunlit kitchen. Afterward, Evelyn would rest while Jonas handled errands, grocery shopping, picking up prescriptions, dealing with the endless administrative tasks that seemed to multiply whenever someone was ill. In the afternoons, they would sit in the garden if the weather was good, or in the study if it wasn't, and talk. Sometimes about important things, sometimes about nothing at all. Evelyn told him stories about her late husband, about the life they'd built together, the travels they'd taken, the dreams they'd shared. Jonas found himself opening up too, sharing memories he'd kept locked away for years, about his parents, about the army, about the friends he'd lost in wars that felt both distant and immediate. It was during one of these conversations, about a week after Evelyn had come home from the hospital, that she brought up the foundation again. "I've been thinking about what I said to you in the hospital," Evelyn said. They were in the study, rain pattering against the windows, a fire crackling in the fireplace. "About you helping me with the foundation. I know you said you'd think about it, but I want you to know I was serious. I meant every word." Jonas set down the book he'd been reading. "I've been thinking about it too. But Evelyn, I don't have any experience running an organization. I don't have a business degree or fundraising expertise or any of the things someone in that position would need." "You have something more valuable than any of that," Evelyn said firmly. "You have authenticity. You've lived the experience these veterans are going through. You understand their struggles in a way no expert ever could. And beyond that, you're a good man, Jonas. You're honest and principled, and you care about doing the right thing, even when it costs you. Those qualities matter more than any credential." "What would I even do? I mean, practically speaking." Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright with enthusiasm despite her fatigue. "The foundation has been operating on autopilot for too long. We have a board of directors, yes, and we have staff who handle the day-to-day operations. But what we're missing is vision, someone who can connect with the veterans we serve and understand what they actually need rather than what we think they need. I want you to be that person. You'd work with me at first, learn how everything operates, meet the staff and board members, and eventually, when I'm gone, don't talk like that," Jonas said quickly. "Jonas, I'm 73 years old with a bad heart. We need to be realistic. When I'm gone, I want someone I trust to carry on this work. Someone who will honor my husband's legacy and actually make a difference in people's lives." She reached across and placed her hand on his. "I want that person to be you." Jonas felt the weight of what she was offering, the trust and responsibility that came with it. Part of him wanted to refuse, to insist he wasn't ready, wasn't worthy. But another part, the part that had been searching for purpose ever since he'd left the army, recognized this for what it was. A chance to matter again, a chance to help others the way he wished someone had helped him. "Okay," he said quietly. "Yes, I'll do it." Evelyn's smile was radiant. "Thank you, Jonas. You have no idea what this means to me." That night, after Evelyn had gone to bed, Jonas sat in the study with Valor at his feet and let himself imagine what this new life might look like. Working with veterans, helping them find jobs and housing and hope. Building something meaningful instead of just surviving day to day. It felt like a gift he didn't deserve, but one he was determined to earn. The case against Curtis Blaine and the restaurant moved forward during those weeks, though Jonas was largely insulated from it by Pemberton's competent handling of the legal proceedings. The attorney would call with updates, depositions scheduled, evidence submitted, motions filed, and Jonas would listen and sign whatever needed signing, but his focus remained on Evelyn. Everything else felt secondary to ensuring she recovered, that she didn't overexert herself or forget her medications or slip back into the loneliness that had nearly consumed her before the accident. It was on a Tuesday morning, nearly 3 weeks after Evelyn's discharge from the hospital, that Pemberton called with significant news. "The restaurant has agreed to our terms," he said without preamble. "All of them. The independent audit, the policy changes, the employee assistance fund, everything. They're prepared to make a public statement acknowledging their failures and committing to reform." Jonas, who had been making coffee when the phone rang, nearly dropped the pot. "They agreed? To everything?" "Every single demand. And they've agreed to fund the Employee Assistance Fund with an initial contribution of $100,000, with annual contributions of $50,000 for the next 5 years. It's unprecedented, Jonas. I've never seen a corporation cave this completely." "What changed their mind?" Pemberton chuckled. "You did. Your refusal to settle, your willingness to take this to court, it scared them. They realized you weren't going to just go away, and the longer this dragged on, the worse they looked. Better to agree to reforms now and control the narrative than to fight you and lose in a very public trial." "And Curtis?" "He's pleaded guilty to stalking and fraud charges. He'll serve 18 months in county jail followed by probation. His law license has been suspended. Apparently he had legal training before he went into restaurant management, and he'll be required to undergo counseling. It's not a life sentence, but it's real consequences. He won't walk away from this unscathed." Jonas was silent for a moment, processing the information. He'd won. He'd actually won. A month ago he'd been sleeping in his truck, wondering how he'd pay rent, convinced the world was fundamentally unfair to people like him. And now a corporation was implementing policy changes because he'd refused to back down. "Jonas, you still there?" "Yeah, I'm here. I need a minute to let this sink in." "Take all the time you need. I'll send over the settlement documents for your review." "You should be very proud of yourself, Jonas. You stood up for what was right, and you won." After Pemberton hung up, Jonas walked into the garden where Evelyn was sitting on a bench, her face tilted toward the weak morning sun. Valor was beside her, and she was absently stroking his ears. Jonas sat down next to her and told her everything. When he finished, Evelyn turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Jonas, that's wonderful. That's exactly what should have happened. I couldn't have done it without you, without your support, your attorney, your willingness to stand beside me." "You did this," Evelyn interrupted firmly. "You fought for yourself when no one else would. I just helped clear the path." They sat together in comfortable silence, and Jonas felt something shift inside him. For years he'd carried the weight of his failures, the job he couldn't keep, the life he couldn't seem to build, the sense that he was fundamentally broken. But maybe he'd been looking at it wrong. Maybe survival was its own kind of strength. Maybe the fact that he'd kept going, kept trying, kept refusing to give up despite everything, maybe that counted for something. The weeks that followed were busy ones. Jonas began working with Evelyn on the foundation, attending meetings, learning the ins and outs of the operation. The staff welcomed him warmly once they understood his connection to Evelyn and his own background as a veteran. He sat in on counseling sessions, helped veterans fill out job applications, listened to their stories of struggle and survival that echoed his own. It was hard work, emotionally draining in ways his kitchen job had never been, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Every small victory, a veteran finding housing, landing a job, reconnecting with family, felt like validation that he was finally doing something that mattered. Evelyn's health improved slowly but steadily. The medications regulated her heart rhythm, and the lifestyle changes, healthier diet, gentle exercise, reduced stress, made her stronger. She had good days and bad days, times when she seemed almost like her old self, and times when the slightest exertion left her exhausted. But through it all, she maintained her sharp mind and sharper wit, offering guidance on the foundation work and slowly, carefully, preparing Jonas to eventually take over. They fell into a rhythm that felt like family. Breakfast together, work during the day, quiet evenings by the fire with valor sprawled between them. Jonas found himself laughing more than he had in years, found himself looking forward to each day instead of just enduring it. And he could see the same transformation in Evelyn, the way the haunted look gradually left her eyes, replaced by contentment and purpose. It was on a crisp October evening, the leaves turning gold and red in the garden, that everything changed again. Jonas had just finished making dinner, nothing fancy, just grilled chicken and vegetables, when he heard a sound from upstairs. A thump, followed by silence. His heart seized, and he was moving before his mind caught up, taking the stairs two at a time with Valor close behind. He found Evelyn in her bedroom, lying on the floor beside her bed. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and rapid, and Jonas felt terror lance through him. Evelyn. He dropped to his knees beside her, checking her pulse. It was there, but weak and irregular. Evelyn, can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered. Jonas, she whispered. Something's wrong. I can't breathe right. Jonas was already grabbing his phone, already dialing 911. As he gave the dispatcher information, he grabbed pillows from the bed and positioned them under Evelyn's head and shoulders, elevating her slightly to help her breathe. Valor pressed close, whining softly, his nose nudging Evelyn's hand. Stay with me, Jonas said, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. The ambulance is coming. Just stay with me, Evelyn. I'm sorry, she murmured. I'm sorry. I stood up too fast, I think, and then... Don't apologize, don't talk. Just breathe, slow and steady. The ambulance seemed to take forever, though it was probably only minutes. When the paramedics arrived, Jonas moved aside to let them work, but he stayed close, his hand reaching out to grasp Evelyn's when she extended it toward him. She held on tight, her fingers cold and trembling, and Jonas squeezed back, trying to channel strength and reassurance through that simple touch. They transported her to the same hospital where she'd been before, and Jonas rode with her again, Valor left behind this time, with a neighbor who'd come running when the ambulance arrived. In the emergency room, Jonas gave the doctors Evelyn's medical history, listed her medications, answered their rapid-fire questions with as much precision as he could manage. And then, once again, he was relegated to the waiting room while they worked on her behind closed doors. This time felt different. Worse. Jonas paced the sterile hallway with his fists clenched, trying to hold himself together. Pemberton came, alerted by a call from Jonas, and sat with him through the long hours. But Jonas barely registered his presence. His mind was fixated on Evelyn, on how fragile she'd looked lying on that bedroom floor, on the fear he'd seen in her eyes. It was past midnight when a doctor finally emerged, and Jonas was on his feet instantly. The doctor's expression was grave, and Jonas felt his stomach drop. Mr. Hale, I'm Dr. Chen. I've been treating Mrs. Marrow. How is she? She's stable, but her condition is serious. She's experienced another cardiac event, more severe than the first. We've had to use more aggressive interventions to stabilize her rhythm, and her heart is showing signs of significant damage. Dr. Chen paused, choosing his words carefully. I won't sugarcoat this. Mrs. Marrow's heart is failing. We can manage it with medication and monitoring, but the reality is that each event weakens it further. She may have months or she may have years. There's no way to predict with certainty. Jonas felt the floor tilt beneath him. Can I see her? She's sedated right now, but yes, she's in ICU, room 4. I should warn you, she's on a ventilator to help her breathe. It looks frightening, but it's temporary while her heart recovers enough to do the work on its own. Jonas nodded numbly and made his way to the ICU. When he entered Evelyn's room, he had to stop in the doorway and steady himself. She looked so small in the hospital bed, dwarfed by machines and tubes and monitors. The ventilator pushed air into her lungs with a mechanical rhythm that sounded too loud in the quiet room. Her silver hair was spread across the pillow, and her face was pale, almost translucent in the harsh fluorescent light. Jonas pulled a chair close to her bed and took her hand. It was cool and limp, unresponsive, and he had to blink back tears. "I'm here," he said quietly, even though she couldn't hear him. "I'm right here, Evelyn. You're not alone." He stayed there through the night, dozing fitfully in the chair, jerking awake whenever a monitor beeped or a nurse came in to check vitals. By morning, his back ached and his eyes burned with exhaustion, but he didn't leave. He couldn't. Around 9 in the morning, Evelyn began to stir. Her fingers twitched in Jonas's hand, and her eyelids fluttered. A nurse came in immediately, checking monitors, and then called for the doctor. They extubated her carefully, removing the breathing tube, and Evelyn coughed and gasped as her lungs remembered how to work on their own. "Easy," the nurse said gently. "Slow breaths. You're doing great, Mrs. Marrow." When Evelyn's eyes finally opened and focused on Jonas, he saw recognition there, and relief. She tried to speak, but her throat was too raw from the ventilator. The nurse gave her ice chips and told her to rest her voice. "Don't try to talk," Jonas said, squeezing her hand. "I know. I'm here." Over the next few days, Evelyn recovered enough to be moved out of ICU into a regular room. The doctors adjusted her medications again, consulted with specialists, discussed options that ranged from pacemakers to experimental treatments. But the underlying message remained the same. Evelyn's heart was failing, and there was only so much medicine could do. Evelyn took the news with characteristic grace, asking intelligent questions and making practical decisions about her care. But Jonas could see the fear lurking behind her composed exterior, could see the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. On her 4th day in the hospital, Evelyn asked Jonas to bring her a leather folder from her study at home. "The brown one. On the shelf behind my desk," she said. "It's important." Jonas retrieved it that afternoon, along with fresh clothes and the books Evelyn had requested. When he returned to the hospital, she asked him to close the door to her room and sit down. "What's going on?" Jonas asked, suddenly worried. Evelyn opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "I need to talk to you about some things, Jonas. Things I should have discussed weeks ago, but I kept putting it off because I didn't want to face what they meant." She took a breath. "I'm dying. We both know that. It might be tomorrow or it might be next year, but my heart is giving out and eventually it's going to stop working altogether." "Evelyn, please let me finish. I've spent the last few days thinking about what I want to leave behind, what kind of legacy I want to have. And I've made some decisions." She handed him a document. "This is my will. I had Pemberton update it last week before this latest episode. I'm leaving everything to you, Jonas. The house, my estate, the foundation, all of it." Jonas stared at the document in his hands, unable to process what he was seeing. "Evelyn, no, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can, and you will." Her voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "I have no children, no close relatives who need this money. My husband wanted the foundation to help veterans, and I can't think of anyone better to carry on that work than you. You've already proven yourself, Jonas. You've shown me that you care, that you'll fight for what's right, even when it costs you everything. That's exactly the kind of person who should control this legacy." "But Evelyn, this is millions of dollars, isn't it? Property, investments. Closer to 12 million, actually. And yes, it's a tremendous responsibility, but I know you can handle it. I've watched you these past months, seen how you've grown, how you've found your purpose again. You're ready for this, Jonas, even if you don't believe it yet." Jonas felt tears burning in his eyes. "I don't want your money, Evelyn. I want you. I want you to get better, to live for years, to see the foundation grow and thrive. I want—" His voice cracked. "I want my friend to be okay." Evelyn's own eyes were wet now. She reached out and cupped Jonas's face with her hand. "Oh, my dear boy, I want that too." But we don't always get what we want, do we? What we get is the chance to make the most of the time we have, to matter to someone, to leave the world a little better than we found it. She smiled through her tears. You gave me that chance, Jonas. You saved my life that night on the highway, and then you saved it again by giving me something to live for. However much time I have left, I'll spend it knowing I mattered to someone, that I helped someone who needed it. That's more than most people get. Jonas pulled her into a careful embrace, mindful of the IV lines and monitors, and held her while they both cried. Valor, who had been allowed into the room by sympathetic nursing staff, pressed against Jonas's leg and whined softly, as if he understood the weight of the moment. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn wiped her eyes and smiled. Now then, let's talk about what you're going to do with all this money. Despite everything, Jonas found himself laughing. You're impossible, you know that? I've been told. She settled back against her pillows, looking suddenly exhausted but also oddly peaceful. There's one more thing I want to ask you, Jonas. When the time comes, whenever that is, I want you to promise me you'll keep going, that you won't let my death become another weight you carry. Promise me you'll live fully, that you'll find joy again, that you'll use this gift I'm giving you to help as many people as you possibly can. Jonas swallowed hard. I promise. Good. Evelyn closed her eyes, a small smile playing at her lips. That's good. Evelyn came home from the hospital 6 days later, weaker than before, but determined to spend whatever time she had left in her own house, surrounded by familiar things. The doctors had done what they could, adjusting medications and providing equipment, an oxygen concentrator that hummed softly in the corner of her bedroom, a hospital bed that could be raised and lowered at the touch of a button, monitors to track her heart rate and oxygen levels. A hospice nurse named Maria came twice a day to check on her, a warm woman with gentle hands who treated Evelyn with dignity and kindness. Jonas moved permanently into the guest room, though he spent most of his time in Evelyn's room, reading to her when she was awake, sitting quietly when she slept. Valor had claimed a spot on the rug beside her bed and rarely left it, as if the dog understood his job now was to stand vigil, to offer comfort through his steady, faithful presence. The days took on a strange, suspended quality. Time seemed to move differently when you knew it was running out, each moment somehow both precious and painful. Evelyn had good hours when she was lucid and talkative, wanting to discuss the foundation or share memories or simply laugh at something on television. And she had bad hours when the pain medication made her confused, when she would wake from restless sleep calling for her husband, temporarily forgetting he'd been gone for a decade. Jonas learned to navigate both, to be present without being intrusive, to offer help without making Evelyn feel helpless. It was a delicate balance, and some days he got it wrong, hovering too much or not enough. But Evelyn was patient with him, gently redirecting when he fussed too much, asking for assistance when she truly needed it. Pemberton came by regularly, handling the legal aspects of Evelyn's estate and ensuring everything was in order. He brought documents for her to sign, updated her will to reflect last-minute changes, and spent hours with Jonas explaining the intricacies of managing the foundation and the estate. It was overwhelming, the sheer scale of responsibility that would soon fall on Jonas's shoulders, but Pemberton was a good teacher, breaking complex concepts into manageable pieces and answering Jonas's endless questions with patience. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after Evelyn had come home, Jonas was sitting in her room reading when she suddenly spoke, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Jonas, there's something I want you to do for me. He set down his book immediately. Anything. In my closet, on the top shelf, there's a wooden box. Will you get it for me? Jonas found the box easily. Cedar, beautifully carved with intricate patterns, about the size of a shoebox. He brought it to Evelyn, and she ran her fingers over the lid with a wistful expression. My husband made this for me years ago. He wasn't particularly skilled at woodworking, but he tried. She smiled. It's full of letters. Letters we wrote to each other during his deployments, before we were married. I haven't looked at them in years, but I'd like to read some now. Would you read them to me? My eyes aren't what they used to be, and I get tired so quickly. Jonas opened the box. Inside were dozens of letters, yellowed with age, some in elegant cursive handwriting, others in a more masculine scrawl. He picked one at random and began to read. The letter was from Evelyn's husband, written from somewhere in Vietnam, describing the heat and the boredom punctuated by moments of terror. But mostly he wrote about missing Evelyn, about counting down the days until he could see her again, about the life they would build together when the war was over. His words were simple but profound, filled with a love that transcended distance and danger. Evelyn listened with her eyes closed, tears slipping down her cheeks. When Jonas finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "He was a good man," she said finally. "We had 42 years together, and it still wasn't enough. I don't think any amount of time would have been enough." "Tell me about him," Jonas said. "Tell me everything." And she did. For the next several hours, Evelyn shared stories about her late husband, how they'd met at a dance, how he'd proposed during a rainstorm, how they'd struggled and laughed and built a life together. She told Jonas about the foundation, how her husband had started it with almost nothing, working tirelessly to help veterans who'd been forgotten by the system that had sent them to war. She told him about her husband's death, how peaceful it had been, how he'd held her hand and told her he'd loved every moment of their life together. "That's what I want you to find, Jonas," Evelyn said, her voice growing tired. "Someone to love like that, someone who makes every moment worthwhile. Don't spend your life alone just because you're afraid of losing people. The love is worth the loss, always." Jonas felt his throat tighten. "I'll try." "Promise me." "I promise." Over the following weeks, Evelyn's condition slowly deteriorated. The good hours became shorter and less frequent. She slept more, ate less, grew frailer with each passing day. But her mind remained sharp during her lucid moments, and she used that time to prepare Jonas for what was coming. She introduced him to key members of the Foundation's board, making it clear that Jonas would be taking over her role. Some of them were skeptical at first, this quiet veteran with no formal business training. But Evelyn's endorsement carried weight, and more importantly, Jonas proved himself in conversations, demonstrating his understanding of veterans' needs and his genuine commitment to the Foundation's mission. She showed him where important documents were kept, explained her filing system, shared passwords and account information. She told him which staff members were reliable and which ones needed more oversight. She talked about her vision for the Foundation's future, programs she'd dreamed of implementing but never had the energy or time to pursue. "I want you to expand the housing program," she said one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. "Too many veterans end up homeless, and it's not because they're lazy or irresponsible. It's because the system fails them. I want the Foundation to buy properties, renovate them, create transitional housing where veterans can stay while they get back on their feet. Can you do that?" "Yes," Jonas said without hesitation. "I can do that. And I want a mentorship program. Pair veterans who've successfully transitioned with those who are struggling. People like you, Jonas, who understand what it's like and can offer real guidance. Will you make that happen?" "I will." Evelyn smiled weakly. "Good. That's good." As November arrived and the trees outside Evelyn's window stood bare against gray skies, Jonas could see the end approaching. Evelyn was sleeping 18, 20 hours a day now, and when she woke, she was often confused, struggling to remember where she was or what year it was. The hospice nurse told Jonas it was time, that it would be days now, maybe hours. Jonas called Pemberton and told him to come say goodbye. The attorney arrived that evening, his usual professional composure cracking as he stood beside Evelyn's bed and held her hand. "You've been a good friend, Richard," Evelyn murmured, her eyes barely open. "Thank you for everything." "The honor has been mine, Evelyn," Pemberton said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're an extraordinary woman." After Pemberton left, Jonas sat alone with Evelyn through the long night. Valor was pressed against the bed, his head resting on the mattress near Evelyn's hand, and she would occasionally move her fingers to touch his fur, as if drawing comfort from his warmth. Around 3 in the morning, Evelyn stirred and opened her eyes. She looked at Jonas with surprising clarity, more present than she'd been in days. "Jonas," she whispered, "I'm here. There's an envelope. In my desk drawer, the top one. It's for you. Read it after." "Evelyn, promise me you'll read it." "I promise." She smiled, that same gentle smile that had greeted him the first time she'd come to his house, and closed her eyes. "Thank you for saving me, Jonas, for giving me these last months, for showing me that my life still mattered. It did matter, Jonas said, his voice breaking. It mattered so much, and yours matters too. Don't forget that. Promise me you won't forget. I won't forget. Evelyn's breathing became slower, shallower. Jonas held her hand and talked to her softly, telling her about the plans he had for the foundation, about the veterans he would help, about the legacy she was leaving behind. He told her about Valor, about how the dog had brought him back from the edge after the war, about how some connections transcend words and logic and become something almost sacred. You were that kind of connection for me, Jonas said, tears streaming down his face. You saved me too, Evelyn. When I'd given up on everything, when I thought I didn't matter to anyone, you showed me I was wrong. You gave me purpose. You gave me hope. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift. Evelyn squeezed his hand weakly, and Jonas saw her lips curve into a final, peaceful smile. She died just as the sun was rising, golden light spilling through the window and illuminating her face. Her breathing simply stopped, so quietly and gently that Jonas almost didn't notice at first. He sat there for a long time, holding her hand, watching the sunlight paint her silver hair with warmth, and felt something inside him break and heal simultaneously. Valor whined softly and pressed closer to the bed, and Jonas reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. She's gone, boy, he whispered. She's at peace now. The hospice nurse came and made the necessary calls. The funeral home arrived to take Evelyn's body, and Jonas stood on the porch with Valor and watched them drive away, feeling hollowed out and strangely calm at the same time. Grief would come later, he knew. The full weight of the loss would hit him when the shock wore off. But for now, he just felt grateful. Grateful that Evelyn hadn't died alone, that she'd been loved and cared for in her final days, that she'd passed peacefully in her own home, surrounded by familiar things. It wasn't until that evening, after Pemberton had come and gone, after arrangements had been made and people had been notified, that Jonas remembered the envelope. He went to Evelyn's study and opened the top drawer of her desk. The envelope was there, cream-colored and sealed, with his name written on the front in Evelyn's elegant handwriting. Jonas sat down in her chair and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, several pages long, and a smaller sealed envelope with instructions not to open it until after the funeral. Jonas began to read. The letter started with practical matters. Reminders about account numbers, instructions for accessing various files, names of people Jonas should contact. But then it shifted into something more personal. By the time you read this, I'll be gone, Evelyn had written. And while I know you'll grieve, I want you to remember that my death isn't a tragedy. I lived a long, full life. I loved deeply and was loved in return. I made a difference in the world, however small. And at the very end, I had you, a friend who made my final months meaningful and joyful. I couldn't have asked for more. I know you'll feel burdened by what I've left you. $12 million, a house, a foundation. It's an overwhelming responsibility, especially for someone who spent the last few years just trying to survive. But Jonas, I didn't choose you because I thought you needed charity. I chose you because I knew you would use these resources wisely, that you would honor my husband's legacy and actually help people instead of just managing assets. You're stronger than you know, braver than you believe, more capable than you've given yourself credit for. The man who pulled me from that burning car, who stood up to Curtis Blaine, who sat with a dying woman through her last nights, that man can do anything he sets his mind to. The enclosed envelope contains information about a property I purchased 6 months ago, before we met. It's a restaurant, closed now, abandoned but with good bones. I'd always thought about renovating it, turning it into something special, but I never had the energy or vision for it. I want you to have it, Jonas, not to run as a traditional restaurant, but as something new, something that serves a purpose beyond profit. I trust you to figure out what that purpose is. You'll know when the time is right. Live well, my dear friend, love fully, find joy in unexpected places. Help as many people as you can, and don't let my death become another burden you carry. I died happy, surrounded by love, knowing my life had meaning. That's all anyone can hope for. With all my love and gratitude, Evelyn. Jonas read the letter 3 times, tears blurring his vision, before he finally set it down. He didn't open the second envelope. That could wait until after the funeral, as Evelyn had instructed. For now, he just sat in her chair, in her study, and let himself feel the full weight of what had happened. He'd lost a friend. He'd gained a fortune. He'd been given a responsibility that terrified him and a trust that humbled him. And somehow, impossibly, he felt ready for it. Evelyn's funeral was held on a cold November morning, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened snow. The service was at a small church on the edge of town, and Jonas was surprised by how many people came. Veterans Evelyn had helped through the foundation, staff members and board members, people from town who'd known her for decades, even some of Curtis Blaine's former victims who'd heard about Evelyn's role in bringing him to justice. Jonas sat in the front pew with Valor at his feet. The church had made an exception for the service dog, and listened as people shared memories of Evelyn. They talked about her generosity, her sharp wit, her unwavering commitment to helping those in need. They talked about her late husband and the love story that had inspired the foundation. And several people mentioned Jonas, talking about how Evelyn had spoken of him in recent months, how proud she'd been of the man he was becoming. When it was Jonas's turn to speak, he stood at the podium and looked out at the assembled crowd. He'd prepared remarks, but they seemed inadequate now, too formal and distant. So he set his notes aside and spoke from the heart. "I met Evelyn Marrow on the worst night of my life," he began. "I'd just been fired from my job for doing the right thing. I was broke, alone, and convinced the world was a fundamentally unjust place. And then I saw her car on fire, and something in me said I had to help. I didn't think about it. I just acted. What I didn't know then was that I wasn't just saving Evelyn's life, she was saving mine too. Over the months that followed, she gave me more than money or opportunity. She gave me something I'd lost a long time ago. She gave me hope. She showed me that one person really can make a difference, that standing up for what's right matters even when it's hard, that connections between people can heal wounds we thought were permanent. Evelyn used to tell me that my life mattered, that I mattered, and for a long time I didn't believe her. But she kept saying it, kept showing me through her actions and her faith in me, until finally I started to believe it too. That's the gift she gave me. Not the inheritance or the foundation or the house, but the belief that I had value, that I could contribute something meaningful to the world. I promise you, Evelyn, wherever you are, I won't waste that gift. I'll use everything you've given me to help as many people as I possibly can. I'll build the programs you dreamed of. I'll expand the foundation until it reaches every veteran who needs help. And I'll try every single day to be the man you believed I could be. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for showing me what love and generosity and purpose look like. I'll miss you every day, but I'll also carry you with me in everything I do. Your legacy will live on, I promise you that." Jonas's voice cracked on the last words, and he had to pause to compose himself. When he looked up, half the church was in tears. After the funeral, after the burial in the cemetery next to Evelyn's husband, after the reception where people shared more stories and offered condolences, Jonas finally went home, to Evelyn's house, which was his house now, though it would take time before it felt that way. He sat in the study with Valor at his feet and opened the second envelope. Inside was a deed to a property on Main Street, along with photographs and an architect's report. The building had once been a restaurant called Murphy's, a local institution that had closed 5 years ago when the owner retired. It was a large space with an industrial kitchen, a dining room that could seat 100, and an apartment above where the owner had lived. There was also a note in Evelyn's handwriting. This could be something special, a place where people who need a second chance can find one. Use your imagination, Jonas. Use your heart. I know you'll create something beautiful. Jonas studied the photographs, seeing past the peeling paint and broken windows to the potential underneath, and slowly an idea began to form. Over the next 6 months, Jonas threw himself into work. He officially took over as director of the Marrow Veterans Foundation, implementing the programs Evelyn had envisioned and creating new ones. The housing initiative launched with the purchase of 3 properties that were converted into transitional housing for homeless veterans. The mentorship program paired 50 veterans in its first year, with success rates that exceeded everyone's expectations. But Jonas's passion project was the restaurant. He hired contractors to renovate the building, working closely with them to preserve its character while modernizing the kitchen and facilities. He met with chefs and managers and staff, building a team that shared his vision. And he created a concept that was part restaurant, part training program, part second chance initiative. The restaurant would be called Second Chance Grill, and it would operate on a simple principle. Anyone who needed a fresh start could work there, regardless of their background. Veterans struggling with PTSD, people coming out of prison, individuals recovering from addiction, anyone who'd been knocked down by life and was trying to get back up, they would all have a place at Second Chance Grill. Staff would receive training in culinary skills, customer service, and basic business operations. They would earn fair wages and have access to counseling and support services. And they would work in an environment that valued their humanity over their past mistakes, that recognized everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves. The menu would feature simple, honest food, the kind of comfort food Jonas had cooked at the grill where he'd worked for Curtis, but elevated with better ingredients and more care. Burgers and sandwiches and daily specials, affordable prices, generous portions. Nothing fancy or pretentious, just good food served by people who understood what it meant to be hungry in more ways than one. Jonas poured his energy and a significant portion of Evelyn's inheritance into the project. He worked alongside the contractors, painting walls and installing equipment. He taste-tested menu items and designed the dining room layout. He interviewed potential staff members and listened to their stories, seeing his own struggles reflected in their faces. The town watched the transformation with interest and skepticism. Some people praised Jonas's vision, but others whispered that he was naive, that a restaurant staffed by troubled people would never succeed, that he was wasting Evelyn's legacy on a foolish experiment. Jonas didn't let the criticism deter him. He'd learned from Evelyn that doing the right thing often meant going against popular opinion, that real change required taking risks others weren't willing to take. On a warm Saturday in June, almost exactly 1 year after the night Jonas had pulled Evelyn from that burning car, Second Chance Grill opened its doors for the first time. The line stretched around the block. People came from all over town, some curious, some supportive, some there just because they'd heard the food was good. Jonas worked the floor, greeting customers and introducing them to the staff, sharing the story behind the restaurant and the foundation that supported it. He told them about Evelyn, about her vision and generosity, about how one act of kindness on a stormy night had led to all of this. The kitchen hummed with activity, the staff working together with surprising efficiency. There were mistakes, of course, orders that took too long, dishes that didn't come out quite right, but customers were patient and forgiving, and by the end of the night, Jonas knew they'd succeeded in creating something special. As the restaurant was closing, as Jonas was helping clean up and preparing to send the exhausted but exhilarated staff home, the front door opened one more time. Jonas looked up, ready to apologetically inform the latecomer that they were closed, and stopped short. Richard Pemberton stood in the doorway, a smile on his face. "I had to see it for myself," the attorney said, walking into the dining room and looking around with obvious approval. "Jonas, this is remarkable. Evelyn would be so proud." "I hope so," Jonas said quietly. "I tried to honor her vision while making it my own." "You did more than that. You took what she gave you and multiplied it. This restaurant, the foundation programs, everything you've accomplished in the past year, it's extraordinary." Pemberton pulled an envelope from his briefcase. "I have something for you. Evelyn left instructions for me to give you this on the 1-year anniversary of her death, or on the day Second Chance Grill opened, whichever came first." Jonas took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single page written in Evelyn's distinctive handwriting. "Dear Jonas, if you're reading this, it means you did it. You took the leap. You trusted yourself enough to build something meaningful. I knew you would, but I'm still proud of you for proving me right. I want you to know that saving my life that night was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. Not because it extended my time on Earth, though I'm grateful for the months we had together, but because it reminded me that I still had something to offer the world. You woke me up from a decade of sleepwalking through life, and you gave me a reason to care again. We saved each other, Jonas. Never forget that, and never forget that the capacity to save others, to change lives through simple acts of courage and kindness, lives within you always. You don't need money or resources or permission. You just need to see someone in need and choose to help. Live boldly, love deeply, help generously, and know that somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, I'm watching and cheering you on. With eternal gratitude and love, Evelyn." Jonas read the letter twice, tears streaming down his face, and then carefully folded it and put it back in the envelope. He looked around the restaurant, at the clean tables and polished floors, at the photos on the wall of the veterans and staff members who'd found new purpose here, at Valor sleeping peacefully in the corner, and felt something settle inside him. This was it. This was what his life had been leading toward. Not the war, not the struggle, not the pain and loss and endless grinding survival. All of that had been preparation for this moment, for this purpose, for the chance to take his own second chance and use it to give second chances to others. The town's reaction to Second Chance Grill evolved from skepticism to support over the following months. As people saw the restaurant succeeding, as they met the staff and heard their stories, as they experienced the genuine warmth and care that permeated every aspect of the operation, attitudes shifted. Local businesses started partnering with the restaurant, offering jobs to staff members who'd completed their training. Churches and community organizations began referring people who needed help. And veterans from across the region heard about the place and came, sometimes for a job, sometimes just for a meal and a conversation with people who understood. Jonas's life transformed completely. He was no longer the forgotten veteran struggling to make rent, no longer the man who felt invisible and worthless. He was a community leader, a respected businessman, someone people turned to for guidance and support. He sat on boards, spoke at events, represented the foundation at conferences, and through it all he remained grounded in the lessons Evelyn had taught him, that real wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched, that power was meaningless without compassion, that success meant lifting others up rather than climbing over them. He also, slowly and cautiously, opened himself up to the possibility of connection in other ways. He went on a few dates, awkward at first, but gradually more comfortable. He made friends beyond professional acquaintances, people he could laugh with and confide in. He let himself be vulnerable, let people see the parts of him that were still healing, still struggling, still learning how to be fully human after years of just surviving. Valor remained his constant companion, aging gracefully, but still as loyal and intuitive as ever. The dog became a fixture at Second Chance Grill, greeting customers and offering comfort to staff members who were having rough days. Children loved him, and adults found his calm presence soothing. More than once, Jonas watched someone having a difficult moment sit down on the floor and bury their face in Valor's fur, drawing strength from the dog's patient acceptance. 3 years after Evelyn's death, Jonas stood in the dining room of Second Chance Grill on a busy Saturday night and looked around with quiet satisfaction. Every table was full, the staff moved with practiced efficiency, laughter and conversation filled the air. In the back corner, a young veteran named Marcus was celebrating his first day at a new job, surrounded by the Second Chance staff who'd trained and supported him. Near the front, an elderly couple who'd been coming every week since the restaurant opened was holding hands across their table, smiling at each other with the kind of contentment that comes from decades of love. And on the wall near the entrance hung a photograph of Evelyn Merrow, elegant in her red coat, silver hair shining, pale blue eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "In memory of Evelyn Merrow, who believed everyone deserves a second chance. This restaurant exists because she gave one to me. Jonas Hale." People often stopped to read the plaque and look at the photograph, and sometimes they would ask Jonas about her. He always took the time to tell them the story, about the storm, the fire, the woman he'd saved who'd ended up saving him. He told them about Evelyn's generosity and vision, about her late husband's foundation and the work they continued to do. And he told them that one act of courage, one moment of choosing to help when you could just as easily walk away, could ripple out in ways you could never imagine. That's what Second Chance Grill is about, Jonas would say. It's about believing that every person you meet, no matter how broken or lost they seem, has the potential for redemption and transformation. It's about choosing to see people's humanity instead of their mistakes. And it's about understanding that sometimes the person you're saving is actually saving you. As Jonas stood there that Saturday night, watching his restaurant thrive and his staff flourish, he felt Evelyn's presence as clearly as if she were standing beside him. He could almost hear her voice, proud and warm, telling him he'd done well, that he'd honored her legacy and created something beautiful. And Jonas knew, with absolute certainty, that she was right. The storm that had brought him and Evelyn together had been devastating and terrifying. But from that darkness had come light, purpose, and connection, and the kind of transformation that only happens when two broken people find each other at exactly the right moment and decide to heal together. He'd saved her life. She'd saved his. And together they'd created something that would go on saving lives for years to come. That was the gift they'd given each other. That was the legacy that would endure. And that was the story that stunned the whole town, not because of the money or the inheritance or the dramatic rescue, but because it proved something people desperately needed to believe, that kindness matters, that courage counts, that one person really can make a difference in the world, and that sometimes the hardest storms lead to the most beautiful dawns. Jonas Hale had started that terrible night as a man who'd lost everything, but he'd ended it as a man who'd found everything that truly mattered, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure that gift, that second chance, reached as many people as possible. Because that's what Evelyn would have wanted, and because that's what love, real love, looks like.